I had no idea what I was doing. Okay. Now, I come from a family that is used to starting businesses, and so I had been involved since a young age in that aspect. And also because in my legal practice, I was constantly exposed to brand new companies. I saw people starting companies all the time. I mean, during that period, it was very common for one of my clients to leave the company that was my client and start another company that then became my client. So I was very used to the idea of starting up, as it were, right? However, I had no idea about the business of selling art whatsoever. In fact, at the beginning, I mean, a couple of times, you know, like the big discussion in my family was like, they're like, wait, so you're actually selling the art? Why are you selling it? It's so great what you're doing. Why don't you just keep everything? And I was like, well, can't really do that. It doesn't work that way because I come from a collecting family. My grandparents that I know of, my grandparents never sold anything. They donated a lot of works. A lot of works were confiscated by the communist government in Cuba when they came into power. They stole a lot of the collection that was in Cuba at the time, which is now like in the national museums there. Or I think a lot of it also left Cuba and it got sold elsewhere, but that's a different story. So I did not come from a background of commercializing art or commercializing culture. On the contrary, we were like in my family, we talked about, oh, why is this interesting? Why is it important? Or like, why is it nonsense? And it was more about, we came at it both from a historical and a cultural perspective because for us, like art defines culture. And, I come from a very small island in the Caribbean. And so defining our culture as Cubans is very important. My family origins are in the north of Spain. And also they come from these like small minority regions. So culture is very important. And it's a vehicle that serves as a mirror of like who we are, Part of the reason I called the gallery Peres Projects, it was always a gallery, but I wanted to be a project-based gallery, meaning that I was going to do 3 exhibitions with an artist. And after the 3rd exhibition, I would no longer work with them. I would move on to other artists because I always wanted to work with a lot of artists. And I didn't necessarily think that it was important to have another gallery in the ecosystem that had a stable of artists that only worked with those artists. At that time, that was my thinking. I thought, oh, that'll be interesting. Well, what I didn't take into account was that as you progressed with these exhibitions with the artists, you were investing a lot into them. And I was producing all the art. I've always like worked with artists who produce things and get big installations and things. And so there was a lot of output, but not a lot of return. And I also noticed that with several of my artists, by the time we had done even the 2nd show, already their star was rising, right? They were getting invited to at one point, I think I had like 8 artists in the Whitney Biennial, I'm talking about in 2004 when I had been in business for, barely a year and a half later, I had like 8 artists that either I represented or who I was showing in a lot of exhibitions, group exhibitions and things. And so I realized, I was like, wait, that idea is so foolish because you can't like champion an artist and then say, hey, other gallery, oh, by the way, I was in California. Back then, the world was very different. The American art world was completely controlled by New York. And in fact, New York had a really like a major sort of hegemony, I would say, in the larger scheme. The world has really changed since then in that regard. And so I quickly realized, no, scrap that idea. This 3-show thing, I remember even telling the artist, hey, by the way, we're not doing the 3-show thing anymore. We represent you, like we're moving on from that idea. So I did a lot of like kind of like silly things like that. But I've always been very interested in innovation, adaptability. I'm very quick to change courses when it's necessary. I think I'm fortunate in a way that because of my own history and my family history, I'm very adaptable. So I can change. I can assimilate very easily to changing situations, and I'm not afraid of change. On the contrary, I actually like change. I know for a lot of people, especially even as they get older, they're like, oh God, like they just want to keep it the same way. And I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, oh yeah, let's try something different. And so we're constantly doing that, and we encourage this type of innovation within the gallery. And we've been doing that now, really, we've been doing it from the beginning because that was, for me, normal.